Hello guys, my name is Lizzie and I run a resin shop called 8-Bit Boutique, and today I'm doing my first tutorial on how to do a resin shaker. So there's a couple things you're going to need for this: baby oil, UV resin, transparency film, a UV flashlight or lamp, a washable marker, a hand drill, and toothpicks. And so we're going to start out with our shaker shell. This is one I already poured. And we're just going to begin by filling it with inserts. You can use pretty much anything that won't degrade in oil over time. So you can use small little resin bits, you can use glitter, you can use gems and rhinestones and just anything like that you want. So I'm just going to fill this up, kind of go back and forth to see what works well with each other, what doesn't, and then fill it until I am happy with the outcome. Okay, so now that that's filled and looks the way we want it, we're gonna go ahead and take our transparency film. And so usually to make transparencies for shakers, I'll actually use my Cricut and do pre-cut ones. But since not everyone has a Cricut, I'm gonna go ahead and show you the tracing method today, and then maybe I'll do another video using the Cricut. But basically I just put the transparency film over top of my shaker, and then I'm going to outline the shape of the cavity that I'm going to want to be covering with a washable marker. And then once that's traced, I'm just going to cut it out with scissors. So now that that is cut out, I'm just going to run my fingers along the edge just to get rid of that marker. And then we're going to move on to our UV resin. So I just put it inside this little silicone cup with my toothpick. And then what you're going to start doing is you're going to start putting a little layer along the edge of where that shaker cavity is. You don't want to do too little, because if you do too little, it can leave these little bare canals. And when you put the transparency film on top of it, that's going to cause leaks. But then if you do too much, it can leak into the shaker cavity and get stuck to your bits and things like that. So you kind of just want to go back and forth and not doing too much but too little, and just eyeball it. Okay, so now I'm just going to make sure my transparency film is clean and make sure there's no little fibers or debris or anything on it, because then it will get inside of your shaker. And then I'm just going to place it over top of that cavity. And I'm going to press down along the edges and make sure that that UV resin is flowing evenly underneath, so that it covers all of the tiny little holes and all the places are pressed down so that we don't have any leaks. And then once that's done, I just put a little bit of UV resin in the lower part where his eyes are here. Reason being is because the transparency film overlaps right there a little bit. And if you don't cover that up, I just find that when you go in with the epoxy resin, it can kind of leave little air bubbles stuck under that transparency film. So for me, it's just easier to take care of now. And now I'm just going to pop it under our UV light and make sure that it cures up before we go on to the next step. So now that that is all cured, we're gonna go ahead and start filling our piece. There's a bunch of different ways you can do this. The most often one I see is that people will drill a hole into the side of the shaker, fill it up with a syringe and then seal the hole, usually with like an eye pin or UV resin or something like that. I usually don't prefer that method just because I find that UV resin can kind of pop off or chip sometimes, and that those are just prone more to leaking. So what I actually do is I will poke a hole in the bottom of the piece as close to the edge as I can, and then I'll fill it through it there. And you can totally fill the piece as much or as little as you want. Usually I like mine pretty full depending on what look I'm going for, so I'll just leave a tiny little air bubble. The only thing I don't like about this method is that it can be a little bit messy because you are poking a hole right in the transparency, so it can tend to leak out a little bit, especially if you fill it as much as I do. So I make sure I just have a little bit of alcohol on hand, and then if I do have any leaks or anything like that, I'll just spritz the piece with alcohol, make sure the hole is dry, and then quickly throw some UV resin over the hole, cure it, and then clean up the piece. And so right here, for example, you can see that I'm starting to get a little bit of leakage. So this is when I'll hurry up and start cleaning it up. And you just want to be extra gentle, not to push too hard on the film where you're cleaning it up, or else it's gonna keep causing more and more to leak out. And so now that I have it dried off, at least where the hole is, I'm just going to quickly put a little dollop of UV resin here. And then I'm going to take my UV flashlight really quick and partially cure it, just so that it can get hard enough to where more is not going to leak out. Then I'm going to spray the piece with some alcohol and then wipe it off, make sure it's all dry and good to go. And then we're going to finish the cure under the UV lamp. Okay, so now you should have a fully cured piece. I'm just gonna push around the edge just to make sure there's no leaks. You also wanna check the sides of your piece, because sometimes there could be like a tiny little micro bubble and it can cause like a tiny little leak you might not notice right away. So yeah, just check over it, make sure it's all good, and your shaker is almost done. And so now, just like with any resin piece, especially with the shaker though, you're going to want to start doming it. I find that with shakers, I like at least 2 layers of doming, just especially with something like this where the cavity is quite large. If you only do one, it can kind of be more prone to cracking and breaking, especially if it's being hit against something or if it drops or anything like that. So in this video, I'm just showing the first layer, but yeah, usually I recommend at least 2 or 3 on a shaker like this. And here is the final piece. You can pretty much do whatever you want with it. You can leave it like this if you just want it to be something fun to play with. You can make it into a keychain like I'm going to. I'm just going to add 2 little bails on the side. If it was a smaller piece, you can make it into like a jewelry item, like a hairpin or something like that. Or you could include it in maybe like a bigger decor item, depending on how skilled you are. But yeah, I love this piece. It's the little Animal Crossing Island Tune piano. I got this mold from Mold Paradise. I will leave her link in the description. Hopefully this tutorial was okay. Let me know if you guys have any other ideas you would like to see from me. And yeah, thank you for watching.